Welcome to Video Village. I'm Mihir Shah, and today we are talking about Christopher Nolan. We'll be discussing all of his films and ranking them, as well as talking about what makes him so great. Christopher Nolan is probably the only director that everybody knows and recognizes, at least people who were born around the same time I was. I think anyone in our generation who grew up when The Dark Knight and Inception came out, Christopher Nolan was just like somebody you talked about, and his movies were things that you discussed and debated. I think he's pretty responsible for bringing a lot of people into the movies the same way Spielberg did in the 70s and 80s with Jaws and E.T., Indiana Jones, etc. In a sense, like Oliver Stone in the 80s did that as well. Martin Scorsese, that is, has done that a lot in his career. I think the 1990s are probably the time where it was most on display, when he had Goodfellas come out in 1990 and then Casino in 95. Sort of just like kind of household names for movies, people back then. But yeah, I mean, I think it was awesome to have Christopher Nolan making movies when I was growing up. His movies are, he made Batman movies, which to a kid who doesn't even like superheroes that much was still very attractive. And he made sci-fi movies, and as a teenager, sci-fi movies are just, they become very important as you're a teen. I don't know why that is, but I feel like every generation of teenagers has just had their version of like greatest sci-fi movies that end up defining their teenage years. But anyhow, I'm not sure if I'm going to be talking about Oppenheimer today. It really depends on like how long I go with this ranking. And I'm pretty sure that I will not be talking about Oppenheimer today. There's a couple reasons for that. I really liked Oppenheimer. I think it's probably one of the best movies of the year so far. Certainly one of my favorite movies of the year so far. Don't think it's perfect. There's a lot to talk about though. And I feel like I need to see it again. I mean, it's 3 hours long. It's a lot of dialogue, and even like as I was leaving the theater, I had questions that I just didn't know the answer to, and I really feel the need to watch it again. Second, I just believe that we're going to be talking about Oppenheimer for the next 6 months, well into award season and Oscar season. So I feel okay delaying an episode about Oppenheimer until I feel confident enough to talk about it and to, like, I don't know, say some interesting stuff about it so you guys aren't listening to like a plot description. That being said, I will include it in the rankings. I'll talk about briefly why I place it where I place it. But yeah, one thing about Oppenheimer that is fascinating is exactly what I said about it, which is it's 3 hours of dialogue. I don't think Christopher Nolan is traditionally that good at dialogue. Inception's a really good example where, like, great movie, but a lot of the dialogue is just characters talking to each other, aka characters talking to the audience about how the world works. So like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character in Inception, he plays a character named Arthur. He's like the right-hand man. I think it's Arthur. Anyway, he's just explaining things the entire time to Ariadne or to Dom. And it's literally just for us to be like, this is how that works. This is what's going to happen now. And then this is going to happen. Then this is going to happen. Then this is going to happen. And then we just watch it happen. Which, like, I'm not saying that ruins the movie. I'm not saying that doesn't make the movie fun and good, because I like to an extent that, like, you get something explained to you that's very complicated and you get to see it and then understand it better. Sure, but that doesn't really necessarily make for, like, memorable conversations. So I think it's fascinating because he took on Oppenheimer, which is all dialogue, and honestly, like, it kind of blew me away in the sense of like how he was able to just be so much better than I thought he could at something like this. There's a couple moments in it that are like very Christopher Nolan-esque. There's moments where, someone's like, oh, there was a senator that led the charge against you, and that's the reason you didn't get put on the cabinet. And then Robert Downey Jr. is like, who was a senator? The guy's like, John F. Kennedy or something like that. It's just like the same way that like Robin was revealed at the end of Dark Knight Rises. Like, I don't know why Christopher Nolan chooses to do that sometimes, but things like that are like kind of like Christopher Nolanisms that make it into Oppenheimer. But for the most part, it moved really quickly, and uh, it was very engaging and just had a lot going on. And I didn't find too much uh, wrong with the way the dialogue was written. Of course, it was a lot, and I probably just need to see it again to have a better opinion on that. But yeah, that's one thing about Nolan. Let's also talk about, since we're talking about things I don't necessarily like about Christopher Nolan, let's talk about the dead wife problem. Christopher Nolan, not really the best, or not really good at writing female characters, quite honestly. Like, the strongest female character he's written is probably Jessica Chastain's character in Interstellar, who plays like the grown-up version of Murph. Yeah, a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies have a lead character that somewhat resembles the way Christopher Nolan looks in real life. And that character usually either doesn't have a wife or has a wife that died. And it's just like it's become kind of a meme. It's just a really easy way for Christopher Nolan to like not really worry about what like the wife character would be like, what that dynamic would be like with a husband and wife, and add that layer to the story. And sometimes it's like super apparent, and sometimes it's like not a huge deal. Like, I think in like Inception, it's like, okay, the wife is like kind of evil, kind of not. I think it's like a good character for the story, for Dom's story rather, but I don't think it's a good character overall. Like, it's not that interesting of a person. It's just kind of like an amalgamation of like Dom's feelings, and then just kind of like reverse that into a character. So yeah, there's a lot of movies where he has just no wife represented, or if a wife is represented, it's just like not strong. Honestly, like Oppenheimer wasn't super good at that either. Like Emily Blunt plays Oppenheimer's wife. I think her name is Kitty, and Kitty's like, she has a couple moments in the second half of the movie, but largely like not in the picture. Again, it's a historical biopic drama, so maybe that was the best choice, but it doesn't really help the pattern that we're seeing. Those are the two things that I really think are issues with Christopher Nolan. I'm going to be talking about a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies, and I maintain that Christopher Nolan has never made a bad movie. He has made movies that I have a lot of issues with, but at the end of the day, I still think they're good, and I still have like a dear place in my heart for a lot of them, considering I watched them when I was 10 to 15 years old. But I will be talking about movies in a positive and negative light, and I hope you don't get offended, because I know a lot of these movies are very near and dear to the audience's heart. So yeah, just a little disclaimer about it. Here's some background information before we begin. So Christopher Nolan has made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 movies as of Oppenheimer's release. Here are the movies and when they were released. His debut film is called Following. It came out in 1998. It's a black and white picture. His next movie, Memento, in the year 2000. Insomnia, the year 2002. Batman Begins in 2005. The Prestige, 2006. The Dark Knight in 2008. Inception, 2010. The Dark Knight Rises in 2012. Interstellar in 2014. Dunkirk in 2017. Tenet in 2020. And Oppenheimer in 2023. That's 12 movies. Before we begin the rankings, I also want to talk about the Oscars briefly. The Oscars are not a good metric for like how good or bad a filmmaker is, obviously, but I do find some of this stuff interesting. So Christopher Nolan has only had himself, not his movies, but he personally has only had 5 Oscar nominations in his career, and he has yet to win a single one. Here are his nominations. In 2002, Best Original Screenplay for Memento. In 2011, Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay for Inception. And in 2018, Best Picture and Best Director for Dunkirk. So Inception is an interesting one, right? So Best Picture that year went to The King's Speech. I think it's like kind of understood amongst a lot of people that award really should have gone to The Social Network, arguably one of the most important pictures of the 21st century, let alone that year. I agree with that sentiment. I think The Social Network definitely should have won Best Picture. However, the best original screenplay category that year, I think Inception actually should have won that award. The winner was also The King's Speech for best original screenplay, and yeah, I just think The King's Speech was just like everyone loved that movie that year, and it had a really big awards push or like yada yada. And it's a cute movie. It's a good movie. It's arguably a great movie, sure, but I just think that Inception. Yeah, the dialogue's not amazing, but it really did create a brand new world that was super strong and had a lot going for it. And so, yeah, I think it's a pretty close race. I do think that that would have been a cool first Oscar for Christopher Nolan. Okay, then let's get to 2018. So 2018, he gets nominated for Best Picture and Best Director for Dunkirk. Here are the other nominees that year, and it was a very strong movie year. The other nominees were Call Me By Your Name, Darkest Hour, which was the movie about Winston Churchill, Dunkirk, Get Out, Lady Bird, which was Greta Gerwig's, I guess not debut film, but the first film that kind of put her on the map, Phantom Thread, The Post, and Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. And the winner of the Oscar that year for Best Picture and Best Director was The Shape of Water. And honestly, looking at it right now, I haven't seen a couple of these movies, including The Shape of Water, but I think that if any year, I think Dunkirk should have won Best Director, like 100%. I think Christopher Nolan should have won the Oscar that year. And arguably, I think it could have won Best Picture and not have been that controversial of a pick. There's a lot of ways that like this might age. I think Get Out is going to be a pretty timeless film, and if Get Out had won Best Picture that year, I don't think anyone would have been really upset. I think it definitely deserves it. But yeah, it is fascinating that like you guys might be surprised, like, oh, why is The Dark Knight not represented? Why is Interstellar not represented? I think The Dark Knight not being represented at the Oscars actually changed the industry forever, because that next year, because The Dark Knight did not get an Oscar nomination, there was a huge outcry from the industry. And the following year, the Oscars changed the Best Picture category from 5 movies to 10 movies, so that more movies could be included that might not traditionally have made the cut or might not traditionally be the same genre, and yeah, Christopher Nolan probably and definitely should have won Best Picture and maybe even Best Director that year for The Dark Knight. But who's to say? So that was just an interesting tidbit, I think. But okay, let's get into some rankings. So 12 movies. I think that the bottom of my list is going to make some people mad. Christopher Nolan ranked number 12. I have, and it's close, it's very close in these bottom 3. But I have at number 12, I have The Dark Knight Rises.
There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne. You and your friends better batten down the hatches. Because when it hits, you're all gonna wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us.
I on one hand, I love this movie, because I remember when it came out, it was just such an exciting time. One of the first times I remember going to movies with friends, it was like this and Think Like a Man. Like one of the two like first times I was like, hey, me and my friends are gonna go to the movies and watch this thing. I think The Dark Knight Rises is really cool. I think Bane is really fun and a little memey, but really fun. The ending with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character getting revealed as Robin was really exciting, and of course, things like the music and just like some decent action is really memorable. But I think the story is just like really kind of weak. Like the stuff about Batman being old and having to get back into it is really, really cool. But all the stuff with like Bane's whole motivation and like all the like the first half of the movie is like about the stock market and like him stealing money and stuff, largely unforgettable. There's just like a lot going on. And it just doesn't really make that much sense. And like you might be saying like, oh, it's a comic book movie, like you're being too hard on it. I don't think I am. Like I think The Dark Knight makes a lot of sense, and The Dark Knight has some holes for sure, but those holes don't like really interrupt your enjoyment of the movie the way I think this kind of does. And then there's the whole thing of when Batman was in that whole prison and he got out, how did he just show up back in Gotham? Like, how did he just get there? There's so many questions there. That I think people like harp on a little too much. Like, he's Bruce Wayne, he's Batman. He could probably have figured out a way to get from, let's say, the Middle East back to Gotham fairly quickly because he is Bruce Wayne. But it's still like things like that just feel like, what are we doing here? Like, it's a huge story that they kind of like spend a lot of time on parts of it that aren't super interesting to me. Yeah, that's all I'll say. It's still really cool. I mean, the whole like football field exploding was an awesome scene. I remember that was in the trailers, and people were like, "Oh, this is gonna be a crazy movie." It's also this movie is also the time I think Christopher Nolan had the most clout ever, because the last two movies before this chronologically are The Dark Knight and Inception, two huge movies that was, you could go into the office or go into school and like talk about Inception and concepts from it, and everyone would know what you're talking about. Like, everybody kind of knew Christopher Nolan. So when The Dark Knight Rises came out, I think everybody was really excited. And yeah, it is fascinating to see like in like pop culture where his clout kind of like rose and fell. Okay, so The Dark Knight Rises is at the bottom of my list. Unfortunately, I just have, every time I watch it, I'm just like, man, like, what is going on? And some parts of it do feel a little trite, but I won't harp on those too much. In number 11, and this is maybe giving a little bit too much credit where credit shouldn't be due, but I do find it fascinating. Number 11, I have his debut film. It's called Following.
Your eyes drift across a crowd of people, and they slowly stop and fix on one person, and all of a sudden that person isn't part of the crowd anymore. They become an individual, just like that. Just became irresistible.
So you followed women?
I followed anybody. I just wanted to see where they went, what they did. It was supposed to just be completely random. You would never follow the same person twice. That was the most important rule. That was the one that I broke first. That's when the trouble started.
This movie is just over an hour long. It's an hour and 10 minutes. Here is the kind of description from Letterboxd. Bill, an idle, unemployed, aspiring writer, walks the crowded streets of London following randomly chosen strangers. A seemingly innocent entertainment that becomes dangerous when he crosses paths with a mysterious character. Basically, he's a guy who just like follows people because he finds people's lives interesting, and he just wants to see where they're going and what they're doing, to like get inspiration for his book or whatever. And he basically does this, and he finds a thief that he kind of like gets into business with and starts to steal stuff alongside. And basically there's a lot of twists in the way that Christopher Nolan does twists and kind of reveals things over time as to like the true identities of who people are. It's also told in a very interesting way that kind of shows Christopher Nolan jumping around time-wise, the way he has gotten very famous for as well. So like we'll see a scene occur, and then we'll see another scene occur, and then you realize that this scene that you're watching is well before the events that you just saw take place, and things like that. And I do like it because it was made very inexpensively. Like, he did a lot with very little money, and I think that's really really impressive. And you can kind of tell that this feels like kind of like boots on the ground filmmaking. And yeah, you also like have this kind of like not super straightforward storytelling device being used that kind of sets up where he goes next with Memento. But it's not really that explained. You kind of have to like watch it and figure out what you're seeing. And I really, really like it when directors do that. I don't like it when directors are like holding my hand too much, which like I still like Inception a lot, but it does hold your hand a lot. And this doesn't. So I think it's pretty great. There's times where it's a little honestly just like plain, and especially now looking back, watching it, knowing who Christopher Nolan is, you can kind of tell after like 45 minutes what the last 20 minutes are going to be. But I do think it's really fun, and it's an interesting kind of look at a director's first film. Good time to also say that Christopher Nolan has a couple short films he made before all of these. One is called Doodlebug that I watched when I was in film school. It's 3 minutes long. It's kind of weird, but it's basically like a man in his apartment trying to squish a bug with his shoe, like trying to like catch it and kill it. And then when he when he actually does it, he realizes that he just killed a mini version of himself, and then you see a large version of himself like kill him. So it's kind of like a loop or something. Pretty weird, pretty cool, but yeah, nothing super memorable. Okay, now we're at number 10. So I guess you could say this is top 10 Christopher Nolan. Number 10, I have, and I think this movie and Following and The Dark Knight Rises are all kind of like at the same level. I could have interchanged them probably, but for the reasons I talked about, they are where they are. Number 10 is a movie called Insomnia.
He washed her hair.
No mutilation?
Not this time.
He tortures him, makes him do things, and keeps him there for 3 days.
This guy, he crossed the line, and he didn't even blink.
Police!
What Detective Dormer doesn't know is that murder is only part of the plan.
Dormer here.
Killing changes you. It's like awareness.
Who am I speaking to?
This movie came out in 2002. I don't think a lot of people have even heard of this movie. This is the only movie that Christopher Nolan directed that he did not also write or co-write. So this movie stars Al Pacino and the late, great Robin Williams as a cop and a serial killer, respectively. So basically, here's the logline. 2 Los Angeles homicide detectives are dispatched to a northern town where the sun doesn't set to investigate the methodical murder of a local teen. So basically, it's Al Pacino going to Alaska and trying to solve this crime. And because it's Alaska, the sun doesn't set, so he starts to kind of suffer from insomnia by the middle of this movie. That becomes kind of a big reason as to why he is just kind of like crazy by the middle of this movie, because he hasn't gotten any sleep. And it's pretty fun, like mystery / like crime movie. And it's kind of about like who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, like, you know, the moral kind of ambiguity when you are in positions that Al Pacino gets himself into. I can't really talk about it too much without spoiling. I found it to be pretty fun. I think it's pretty good time. Al Pacino is electric on screen, and Robin Williams is pretty good as like a creepy serial killer. It still feels like it's Robin Williams, but it's also like, wow, this guy's like not a good guy. And there's some very intense moments, and it's good. It's pretty fun. You know, I don't recommend seeing it on the big screen or anything, but if you have a chance to rent it or you know, see it for $2.99 on Amazon Prime, I would take that any day. It's a if you like mystery and crime movies, it's a pretty good watch. Number 9 on the Christopher Nolan rankings is a film by the name of Batman Begins.
Bruce?
Rachel?
You were gone a long time.
I know.
Things are worse than ever down here. What chance does Gotham have when the good people do nothing?
I actually did rewatch this movie fairly recently in the last month, and it was fun. It was super fun. You know, it's a cool precursor to The Dark Knight, which is, you know, definitely better than this movie, but it's got everything you would want from like a superhero origin story. I think that like it's tough to watch this movie after knowing where The Dark Knight goes because of how kind of like plain some of this stuff is. Like the villain is not really as interesting as you'd want him to be, played by Liam Neeson. So it's like a good role. It's a good performance, but it's not the Joker. Like it's like you're kind of hoping he's going to be like this so much more. But it is fun. It has all the elements of like getting to know who Bruce Wayne is, Bruce Wayne getting to know himself, and getting to know who Batman is. And like define what that character means. You have some stuff in it that obviously comes back into play during The Dark Knight and during The Dark Knight Rises with like Gary Oldman's I guess Lieutenant Gordon character, the main cop. He's in it, and he kind of comforts Bruce Wayne as a kid, and then becomes Bruce Wayne, or becomes Batman's like kind of like chief conspirator, I guess. You have all the stuff of like the Batcave and building that out. And then, of course, Rachel Dawes, who in this movie is played by Katie Holmes, who is just like so attractive. I remember just like she was just like, wow, I am so sad she's not in The Dark Knight. Like, she's so hot. Like, I wish they like didn't recast her. I think actually was supposed to be in The Dark Knight, but then had like scheduling conflicts or I don't know. I think there was some sort of like minor controversy. So she was not in The Dark Knight and was instead replaced by Maggie Gyllenhaal, who I will say, like, now as a not horny teen watching The Dark Knight and watching Batman Begins, Maggie Gyllenhaal is like incredible in The Dark Knight and is definitely a better actor than Katie Holmes, and I'm glad that we landed on Maggie Gyllenhaal in that movie. It kind of adds like this like air of serious prestige to an otherwise like comic book-esque movie. It's a fun time, and it sets the stage for a really fun franchise. You have the really fun score by Hans Zimmer. Yes, Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard both worked on the score for Batman Begins, as well as the score for The Dark Knight. Also, I just learned on Wikipedia that Katie Holmes just did not want to be in The Dark Knight. She was just not that interested, so she went on and did a handful of other movies that were super unmemorable instead of one of the greatest movies of the 21st century. Boo-hoo. Okay, Batman Begins at number 9. If you haven't seen this movie in a while, I recommend it. It's pretty fun, but I think it's also like, I think you'll be able to see what I'm talking about, where it's like it does just feel like a superhero movie and doesn't really ascend the way The Dark Knight does. But okay, number 8 on my list. And now we're getting to territory where I think like people, if they didn't feel this way about the Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises, they definitely are going to feel this way now, which is that XYZ movie is going to be too low on your personal list. And you know what? I'm sure it is. This list is very hard to make because all these movies are cool, and depending on when you watched it, you might be like, no, that movie's a 5-star movie, even though it probably isn't. And that's okay, because movies are for everyone, and you're allowed to like things, but so am I. So, at number 8 is The Prestige.
Every great magic trick consists of 3 acts. The first act is called The Pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, but of course, it probably isn't. The second act is called The Turn.
He's obsessed with discovering your method.
The magician makes this ordinary something do something extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. That's why there's a third act called The Prestige. This is the part with the twists and turns, where lives hang in the balance.
This movie is really cool. I saw it probably only like a year or two ago. Released in 2006. It is about 2 magicians whose rivalry leads them to a lifelong battle for supremacy. And there's a lot of like deceit and jealousy and kind of obsession of these 2 magicians who, one is a better magician but a much worse showman than the other, which makes for like a very interesting rivalry. One is kind of trying to learn the secrets of the other, while the other is trying to figure out how to put on a better show. I found this movie fascinating because I believe that this movie is sort of like a thesis from Christopher Nolan about what he believes about art. Here's what I wrote when I watched this movie. I said, Christopher Nolan may not be the best filmmaker in the world, but he may very well be the greatest showman of the 21st century. The final act of The Prestige serves as a thesis for Nolan's career. Give the audience a good show, leave just enough room for the cynical to disbelieve, but the rest of the audience should only see magic. The pacing of The Prestige is perfect until the last act, where Nolan slows down to let the audience in on his way of thinking, showing you some of the secrets to his own prestige. It's fascinating to view this movie now after having seen Tenet, where he refuses to hold her hand, and instead practices what he preaches in this 2006 illusionary tale of what it is to be a performer. I find myself with a renewed fascination of his filmography and perspective. And I basically just conclude by saying that Tenet is a misunderstood masterpiece that will be remembered in 20 years as just like an incredible achievement. I like this movie a lot. It's really cool. It's like, a director playing a magic trick on us. It's very sneaky. I think it's a little long for what it's trying to do, and I do think that like the pacing is a little weird at times, but it's a pretty awesome like epic tale of 2 magicians through their whole career, it's just a good time. It also stars Michael Caine, and it stars Scarlett Johansson in supporting roles. I think a lot of people who like love this movie, and I get it. Like, I think this movie is really cool. I think if you watched it at a certain time in your life, that you would be like, wow, like this movie really does a lot of cool things, which it does. It's one of those movies that also plays with time in the way that it tells a story. You kind of watch 2 people in current day talking about things, and then you see kind of both of their stories for the last 20 years kind of play out until the very end. I also found that like some of the twists that occur were a little way too obvious, I think. Like it was like from the first 30 minutes, I was like, oh, I think that's what's happening. And then that's what happened. So, that I think adds a little bit to my placement on this list. But, we're getting into territory now where like every movie is pretty good. So I don't have that many bad things to say about The Prestige. Okay. Number 7 on my list is Oppenheimer. This is where I'm going to place this movie. No spoilers in this quick description, but this is the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man who is credited as the father of the atomic bomb. And it is a 3-hour talky drama that chronicles pretty much his whole career and life, and his personal relationships and his professional relationships, and basically takes us through the Manhattan Project and through the development of the atomic bomb and what the politics of that whole situation was. And then kind of the fallout. Well, about 2 hours in, we see the atomic bomb being developed and built and tested, and then we kind of see the fallout and what occurred after the World War ended, and I guess just like what his career kind of amounted to and what kind of man he was before and after these events. It's told in a really interesting way, where you have a black and white version of this tale that is kind of objective truth, and then you have a in color version of the story that is Oppenheimer's subjective perspective. And that I just found that all to be fascinating. I think this movie has an incredible score. Ludwig Göransson's score. Ludwig Göransson also worked on Tenet. He worked on Black Panther, for which he won an Oscar. And I think he's going to win an Oscar this year for Oppenheimer. I just don't see another movie kind of taking that award from him. And so, yeah, the visuals are awesome. Dialogue is awesome. You have amazing actors. You have a huge cast list of, like, incredible actors and random cameos from Josh Peck and Roderick from Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which is really funny as well. Yeah, and it's just a movie that is relevant today because it's about short-sighted men and world-changing research, and I think both of those things are as true today as they were in the 1940s when this story was actually taking place in real life. I thought that the filmmaker would want me to like Oppenheimer at the end of this movie, and that's just not the case. I think I actually almost feel sympathy, if not just like understand his biography very well, and just fascinated by it. So I am excited to watch this movie again. There's a good chance that it'll get bumped even higher on my list, but yeah. I have a theory about Christopher Nolan, and I think that theory is best kind of captured by another movie that I have not ranked yet, but I will be talking about soon. And that theory is that I think Christopher Nolan's best movies, when you rewatch these movies, they're even more rewarding. So I think a lot of his movies kind of have a lot of spectacle, but when you end up rewatching them, you realize that that's all it was just spectacle. But I think his best movies are like when you rewatch them, you get even more from them for whatever reason. And so I'm hoping that when I rewatch Oppenheimer, that's how I feel, because obviously the spectacle of this was this like kind of bomb detonation sequence that occurs in the middle of this movie that's just like kind of riveting and you're on the edge of your seat. But I hope that on rewatch I look at this movie and I'm able to get more and more I guess like value and merit from other aspects of it. Alrighty, number 6. Now this movie I think probably deserves a spot on the top 5, but it's a question of like rewatching it, which I just have not done because I watched this movie for the first time in 2022. So number 6 on my list is Memento.
You don't remember where you've been or what you've just done.
I can't make new memories. Everything just fades.
What's the last thing you do remember?
My wife.
That's sweet.
Dying.
Memento is Christopher Nolan's second movie and the movie that kind of skyrocketed him to fame and really blew him up. I think that a lot of people consider this to be like one of, if not his greatest work still to this day. I understand why. Basically, a man is trying to track down who raped and killed his wife. But the problem is that he suffers from short-term memory loss. So every 15 ish minutes, he just forgets a lot of things. So in order to kind of combat this, he starts to take pictures and most importantly, write and tattoo things onto his body to remember key details about the murder and key details about the discoveries he's making when he's trying to kind of solve this crime. It's told in an incredibly interesting way, which is that it's actually told backwards. You're watching kind of the end of the movie, and then you kind of every 15 minutes you kind of rewind and go watch a scene that took place before, and through that you kind of piece together this puzzle, and by the end of it you are left with a full picture of what has happened, and it is not at all what you would have thought this movie was going to do. It is a really, really cool way to tell a story, and on one hand it defined Christopher Nolan, and like he has kind of been doing this his whole career where he just like messes with time, but on the other hand it also like helped define like a new genre of storytelling, I think, which is just like everything is not what it seems storytelling, where it's like everything's a magic trick kind of thing. I think a lot of directors have started to do this. You watch like more and more movies where like they're playing with time, and you don't realize that what you're seeing is actually taking place before other things and whatnot. Arrival does that really well, but I think Memento was like the greatest example of that. Really cool movie, really great performances, and I think just like pretty well paced. You know, like there's times where it operates a little more slowly as you're getting to know certain details about things, and then there's times where it's just kind of moving, and it has a really, really electric conclusion. So yeah, I think just that like I need to rewatch this movie to kind of bump it higher on my list. But there's really not too many bad things to say about this. It's also a movie that would be fascinating to assess against my theory of like substance versus form kind of. But yeah, number 6, Memento. Go check it out. I'm sure it's available to stream somewhere online. It's awesome. If you've ever seen the Bollywood movie Gajani, by the way, starring Amir Khan, that's a remake of this movie. All right, we're in the top 5 category, so all of these movies are awesome. You are not gonna like my ranking. I'm just telling you now. I don't think any listener of this podcast is going to agree with my ranking. But you know, I hope that means that you learn something about how I feel, and you learn stuff about the movies that I'm telling you about, and maybe it causes you to reconsider some of your own thoughts. I'm vamping because I'm like afraid to start talking about the number 5 movie on the list. My number 5 is Interstellar.
Dad, why did you name me after something that's bad?
No, we didn't.
Murphy's Law.
Murphy's Law doesn't mean that something bad will happen. It means that whatever can happen will happen. We must confront the reality that nothing in our solar system can help us. Now you need to tell me what your plan is to save the world.
I think Interstellar is awesome. I think when Interstellar came out, it was probably my favorite movie I had ever seen. It has a electric, once-in-a-lifetime score by Hans Zimmer that I'm sure everybody has like studied to or worked to or just listened to on repeat. It's magical. The visual effects are stunning, and I just think it's a fun universe, like, and a fun story, and some of the dialogue is just kind of timeless, you know, like we used to look up at the stars and wonder about our place among them, and now we just look down and look at the dirt. All those kind of concepts are really fun. Yeah, my issues with it is just that I think the ending is so bad. I just think that like everything in the last 35-ish minutes, pretty much everything after the Matt Damon cameo and the docking sequence where the spaceship is spinning and McConaughey's character has to like kind of park on top of a moving spaceship. Everything kind of after that was really just bland, sure, but like it just didn't make sense at all, and they just don't really even try to explain things. I'm okay with the I'm now in the dimension of time and I'm able to like look at things. I'm okay with that concept because I think it's cool when you look back at the beginning of the story and you realize that like McConaughey's character was the ghost that Murph kept talking about. I think that's really, really sweet. but I just wish they like took more time to like explain what the hell is going on and like how it works, because that movie is like, they explain how a lot of things work in that movie the same way they do in Inception. Like, it's a lot of talking about like, this is how this works, this is what this means, and then they just don't do that at all for the most complicated and like arguably most important part of like this science fiction movie. And that just made no sense. And then it just cuts to the future when there's like a future kind of civilization in space and all of this stuff, and it was just like kind of weird and a lot. And yeah, it just didn't do anything for me. Like I didn't like it. I don't think the emotional impact was super strong. I think like Murph being an old lady is like sweet, but also like by that point I was just kind of like out of the movie. So yeah, I just have a lot of qualms with like the ending of this movie. I think if the ending was better, it probably is in the conversation or deserves the GOAT position in his filmography for a lot of reasons. That being said, I get it. I get why it's beloved. I also think it's really great, and I also love a lot of aspects of it. If I rewatched it, I'm sure I'd have a good time for most of it and kind of be taken back 10 years to childhood and just growing up and dreaming and all this stuff. That's a great thing that movies can do. But yeah, the ending is just, it needs work. It needs work. Okay, number 4 on my list is Inception.
There's one thing you should know about me. I specialize in a very specific type of security. Subconscious security.
You're talking about dreams?
Inception is awesome. It is I guess like just complete story. I think a lot of my issues with Interstellar are not present in Inception, where like the ending makes sense, and the ending is the beginning of the movie, which also is really cool. And you're kind of like gearing up for the ending the entire time, because Dom is like, I just need to get back to my kids. And so that payoff of that final 5-minute sequence of him returning to America and seeing his kids, and Time by Hans Zimmer, that track that plays at the very end is like awesome. A lot of great moments there. I just think it's like one of the coolest visual worlds I've ever been a part of, and just executed almost flawlessly, and a lot of twists where I think one aspect of the movie that is underrated is that like you're watching a bunch of criminals work. Like, this is a heist movie, and these guys are villains. Like, there's a reason Dom is not allowed back in the States. Like, yeah, he was falsely accused of killing his wife, but like in the meantime he's been literally a criminal, the just stealing secrets from people. He literally like causes a company to fail because of like, you know, the whole Cillian Murphy plot line of him like trying to convince this guy to not carry on his father's company. Like, that's all made up. Like, he's just, it's all like political. I don't know, it's just a cool aspect of it. Like, these guys are not good people. Like, it's not really talked about because I think Christopher Nolan like wants you to root for these people, which you do, but it's fascinating. It's probably like this and like Oppenheimer. I guess you could say like, I don't want to spoil it. There's a couple other movies that he has where it's like about bad people, but yeah, this one was in particular. I think it's like an underrated aspect of it, which I think is cool. Gosh, what else? Just a cool cast. Like, Tom Hardy fucking rocks in this movie. I really like Joseph Gordon-Levitt as an actor, even though he gets like a lot of the shittiest dialogue in this movie. Not really a huge DiCaprio performance in this, but like it is memorable. I think a lot of people assume that he was nominated for an Oscar for this performance. He was not. In fact, no actors were nominated for Oscars for this movie. I mean, but it's really fun, and I think it's one of his most iconic movies, maybe even more iconic than The Dark Knight, because of just the way it seamlessly became a part of the pop culture. Like, we talk about, if you say the word Inception at work, everyone knows what you're talking about. Dream within a dream, stealing things from dreams, rather. And just like the importance of dreams in pop culture was like huge after this for a while, which I think is really, really fun. And yeah, it's really rewatchable too. A lot of the action really holds up. I think an underrated part of this movie is the third layer of the dream, when they're in the like icy, snowy world, and Tom Hardy's like skiing around and like shooting people. all that stuff is like sick and like not even an important part of the movie really, but I think it's done awesomely. So yeah, a lot of good things in this one. Nothing really like top of mind bad about it besides the fact that the dialogue is just like really straightforward. Okay, my number 3 is guaranteed. I don't think anybody, unless you've seen this movie 2 times or at least like seen this movie once and really understood it, you are not going to have liked this movie, which I understand because when I first watched this movie, I did not like it. My number 3 is Tenet.
All I have for you is a word. Tenet. It'll open the right doors, some of the wrong ones too. Use it carefully.
Look, when I first watched Tenet, I didn't get it. I didn't think it was good. I think it made no sense, and it just kind of like did things. And I was like, you have to tell me what's going on. I don't understand. And then I just wrote it off. The second time I watched this movie, I understood it because I knew what happened. And when you rewatch this movie, I think everything just kind of falls in place for you as a viewer. There's parts of it that are still harder to grasp, but that's because, unlike Inception, no one is holding your hand this entire movie. That being said, it does make sense. This movie absolutely makes sense. This movie is comprehensible. You just have to, I guess, be patient with it and maybe watch it more than once. If you watch it once and you're just confused and trying to think about what just happened while another thing is happening, you're not really like living in the moment when you watch it. So my recommendation to you is to watch this movie again. I think this movie is a masterpiece. I really do. The story is very clear in my mind, and I'm in love with the way this movie is told and what it's doing. I think it's a genius script from Christopher Nolan. Inception is such a linear story compared to this. Me and my friends who I watched this with, we thought of like dozens of potential plot holes that we thought that they had missed. And as we started to talk about them more, we realized that Christopher Nolan had thought about everything, and there wasn't actually more than one big plot hole towards the beginning of the movie. And rather, that's not really a plot hole so much as something that I still am just a little confused about, which is the opening scene and what role it plays in the story. But I have theories about it. But anyway, here's some things about it. One of the most entertaining opening scenes to any movie I can remember. Definitely one of the best opening scenes to an action movie ever. John David Washington, who's the lead actor here, is super charismatic in this movie, and he's super athletic. Like when he runs, you feel like you're watching like a football player run. Like he's just awesome. And he also is playing this role of like Christopher Nolan movies take themselves very seriously. And I think this movie, while the movie might be taking itself a little bit seriously, I think the lead character feels more like a traditional action hero character where like it's like Mission Impossible or James Bond-esque, where it's like him kind of saying one-liners, to enemies. Like he walks into the back kitchen right before he like beats up a bunch of guys and he's like, I ordered my hot sauce an hour ago. Like stuff like that, where it's just like that doesn't belong in a Christopher Nolan movie, yet it exists here. I think that this is the most underrated movie score probably ever. Ludwig Göransson's score to this movie is incredible. I have listened to the opening track called Rainy Night in Tallinn probably like a billion times this year. It's on my workout playlist. I listen to it when I'm walking around New York. Sometimes it's just like incredible. And yeah, just an awesome opening sequence, which that song Rainy Night in Tallinn is scoring. What else? Yeah, there's just I guess I can't really talk about this movie without spoiling it, but the idea that you can move backwards in time in this movie is executed really well, because I think for the first hour that doesn't really happen. You're kind of getting like slowly kind of placed into this world, and once you kind of get going into it, it's just like a roller coaster ride of action sequences where you learn more truth about the world while also being like super entertained by people fighting other people who are fighting backwards in time. Just like crazy trippy stuff. There's in particular a really memorable scene where you're watching the bad guy I guess, interrogate the main character, but the bad guy is moving in reverse. And that scene when I first watched it made zero sense. And now when I rewatched it, while it was still a little complicated to grasp, made a lot more sense to me and was like very impactful and visceral in the moment, where you realize the stakes of what's going on a lot more. And I just think it was just an awesome thing. And then the final sequence of these like two teams trying to accomplish a mission. One is moving forwards in time, one is moving backwards in time, and this is the pinnacle of like what the hell is going on. And still to this day I'm like, what the hell is going on? But it's executed so fucking well. Like there's so many cool things happening all at once. And a name that I haven't said yet, but he's awesome, is Robert Pattinson. Robert Pattinson in this movie kind of plays the sidekick and becomes more and more important to the story as it goes along. And then by the end of it is arguably the most important character in the story. And he's super charming, super charismatic. And I think like after watching this movie, it made a ton of sense that he plays Batman, because he's got Bruce Wayne down. Like this movie is basically playing a version of Bruce Wayne. I'm in love with this movie. I want to talk about it with more of my friends. So listeners, like if you're listening to this and you haven't seen Tenet, like go watch it. Text me about it. Reach out. Let's have a dialogue. Let's have a healthy dialogue about this movie where you aren't cursing and yelling at me for making you watch it. That'd be great. All right. Number 2 on my list is not going to be your number 2. The two movies we have so far, or rather the two movies we have left are Dunkirk and Tenet. Dunkirk and The Dark Knight. And my number 2 is The Dark Knight.
Let's wind the clocks back a year. These cops and lawyers wouldn't dare cross any of you. I mean, what happened? Did your balls drop off? You see, a guy like me...
Freak.
A guy like me. Look, listen. I know why you choose to have your little group therapy sessions in broad daylight. I know why you're afraid to go out at night. The Batman. See, Batman has shown Gotham your true colors, unfortunately. Dent, he's just the beginning. And as for the television's so-called plan, Batman has no jurisdiction. He'll find him and make him squeal.
If you had this movie at number 1, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I very easily could have placed this movie at number 1, and I don't think anybody would have had an issue with that. The Dark Knight is awesome. It is one of, if not the greatest superhero movie ever. Definitely the greatest live-action superhero movie ever. It is an amazing achievement in so many ways. I'll just like rattle off things about it, but you have obviously Christian Bale as Batman, who's riveting in this movie. You have Heath Ledger as the Joker, who passed away tragically before this movie was released, like 6 months before this movie was released, actually. Went on to win an Oscar for this performance after he had passed. And he is absolutely like the best thing about this movie. He definitely won this movie. And it just gives you a performance that like will never leave your mind. And yeah, there's the city of Gotham kind of plays like a character in this movie, which is really cool. Like I think the Joker interacts with the city really, really interestingly, and there's a lot of awesome scenes where like you just feel like it's a movie about the society and the city as a whole, that's not really true in Batman Begins. I think they kind of try to make it true in The Dark Knight Rises, but it's not as successful. This movie is like, there's a bank robbery and there's 2 cruise ships filled with people, and they're involved in the story. And then there's fights happening in buildings. There's him jumping off buildings. All this stuff that takes place in the city just feels very visceral. You have like cars driving through traffic. You have people. You have hospitals. Like there's a lot going on in this that kind of makes the city come alive. Christopher Nolan said that is directly inspired by a movie called Heat. Heat came out in 1995 and is awesome. I just watched this like 2 weeks ago, actually, on my way to Germany on the plane. Heat is like a crime thriller starring Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. Al Pacino plays a cop. Robert De Niro plays the, criminal thief. And it's sick. And I can tell that The Dark Knight is kind of basing a lot of aspects of it off of that film, because Heat also features a bank robbery where they're wearing masks and stuff, among other things. And so, yeah, just a little tidbit for you. The Dark Knight is also, like I said earlier in the episode, responsible for changing the Oscars forever, because now we have 10 Best Picture nominees instead of 5. That's because The Dark Knight did not get a nomination for Best Picture, and everybody was up in arms, rightfully so. I think the action in this movie is incredible, specifically the sequence where they're transporting Harvey Dent, because I think Harvey Dent is Batman, and the Joker kind of intercepts this like SWAT team, and I guess it's like attacking them in this like tunnel, and then you have the truck driving and getting flipped over by Batman, and then you have Batman driving towards the Joker, and the Joker saying like, "Do it, I want you to do it, I want you to do it." It's just a riveting 15 minutes of an action movie that kind of like also is one of the I guess a character development climaxes in the film. The whole arc of like Harvey Dent and Rachel Dawes, and what happens to Rachel and what that does to both Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent. Incredible stuff. Like one of the most intense things in a superhero movie, and I can't believe they like chose to kill Rachel Dawes the way they did. Gosh, what else? I mean, I could talk about this. This movie deserves its own podcast, as does a lot of other movies on this list. So I'm not gonna like harp on it too much, but yeah, easily could have been my number one. But and it's not that I have anything against The Dark Knight. It's just, when you watch The Dark Knight now, like there's a couple parts that like are edited a little weird, kind of paced a bit odd, especially towards the beginning of the movie, like the first 45 minutes. There's a lot of like background with that Asian character Lau, and like all of that stuff that we spend a lot of time on, and it's like, do we need to know any of this stuff? Like, it just feels like so random. Like when you think about The Dark Knight, you do not think about the Chinese guy Lau and like all of that stuff in Singapore and stuff. Like, it's just like there's a lot going on that maybe didn't need to be in it. I'm not saying that like ruins the movie by any means, but it's just like there's some superhero kind of BS going on, but obviously the rest of the movie is elevated to a almost perfect level, and so very iconic. Definitely kind of put Christopher Nolan on the map as like a amazing filmmaker, because he did what no one else could, which is make a superhero movie into a prestige movie, a prestige drama. And I think Marvel and DC have been trying to recreate the success of this, and they just haven't been able to. This is still the best of the best. But number one is the movie called Dunkirk.
Where are we going?
Dunkirk.
I'm not going back.
If we go there, we'll die.
You're a weekend sailors, not the bloody Navy.
You should be at home.
There's no hiding from this, son. We have a job to do.
Turn it around!
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall never surrender. We shall never surrender. We shall never surrender.
I think Dunkirk is Christopher Nolan's magnum opus. I think it is a masterpiece. I think that it is one of the greatest war films I've ever seen. Definitely one of the greatest achievements ever captured on film. It kind of has Christopher Nolan at his best visual spectacle, at his best storytelling abilities, and at his best dialogue, because there's barely any in it, which is just, I think Christopher Nolan's superpower is just not using dialogue. Like, just the less dialogue, the better, basically, from Christopher Nolan, which is crazy because Oppenheimer is all dialogue. This movie I think when I first watched this movie, it was really intense, but I was a little confused by it, the same way I was by Tenet, because this movie is not told linearly. You basically have three storylines going. You have one storyline that is taking place on the beach of all these soldiers trying to get onto boats so that they can be saved and rescued, because they're basically, it's a British army stuck in France while the German army is like surrounding them. Then you have the boats, or the boat storyline. And what that is that you basically have civilian boats sailing to Dunkirk to save these soldiers, because the military ships keep getting bombed by the Germans. And so these civilian kind of fishing boats are being sailed out to save these men. And that's one storyline. And then the last storyline is the fighter pilots. And Tom Hardy is sort of the main fighter pilot here. And this story is told together, but all of those things happen at different times. So the beach storyline takes place over a week. The boat storyline takes place over a day. And the plane storyline takes place over an hour. And so when you're watching it, you'll see something take place from the plane's perspective. And then you'll see that same event happen 30 minutes later in the movie from the boat's perspective. And so that element of this movie was confusing at the time. On rewatch, it's executed flawlessly. Maybe it takes a little bit to understand, but it really does make a lot of sense. It adds a lot of tension to scenes because he's able to play with our perceptions of what's going on. Like, we see something from the plane's perspective and we think we understand what's going on. And then we watch it from the boat's perspective and we realize we had no idea what was going on and we were wrong about what was happening. The best example of this, I think, is when one of the planes goes down and the plane that's still in the air looks down and he sees his pilot down there, like, waving at him. And this pilot in the air, played by Tom Hardy, says, like, oh, that means he's good, so he flies off. 30 minutes later, we see that same event happen from the boat perspective. You see the plane land in the water. And you realize that man was not waving at the fighter pilot. That man was trying to stick his hand out of the glass that he was stuck in, and he was literally about to drown. And so, like, little moments like that are really fun to kind of watch and get excited by now. I just think it's this is basically just like a monumental storytelling feat where there's, like, really no dialogue. It's all action, and it's all kind of motivated by this musical score by Hans Zimmer that definitely should have won an Oscar. There's a clock ticking the entire movie. It's at different volumes at times, and it's at different you hear it in different ways, but there's a ticking sound the entire movie, and it is literally the most intense score I've ever heard in my entire life. Just done really well. And it's also a story that's, like, very clearly close to Christopher Nolan, right? This is a story about a British failure, but it's told in a way that's about a British kind of victory. It's a British miracle. I think Dunkirk means a lot to Britain. I guess, like, it's very similar to the way, like, you know, if we watch a movie about Pearl Harbor, or if we watch a movie about 9/11, it means a lot more to Americans than it may mean to people around the world. I think Dunkirk is a very British event and a very British film. And that really comes across with, like, the fact that, like, all these characters are unknowns, right? All the soldiers don't have names. You don't really get to know any of them because they didn't know each other. They were all just random people who were fighting and trying to get home. And the way they're able to kind of, like, still tell a story where you feel invested even though you have no idea who anyone is a testament to, I think, Christopher Nolan trying to tell a true story about true people trying to survive a super dangerous event. This feels a little ranty, so I apologize. I just think that, like, my theory of the best Nolan films being the ones that reward you on rewatch because there's a lot of visual choices beneath the spectacle. It's not just spectacle. This is that. I think this movie is, like, yes, there's a lot of visual spectacle, but there is so much underneath the surface happening here. And yeah, just done incredibly well. I think it's his masterpiece. I think it'll be remembered as his greatest movie when we kind of have 30 Nolan films to look back on one day. And so, yeah, if you haven't seen this movie since it came out, or you haven't seen this movie, period, I could not recommend it more. I just think it is fantastic. So there we go. Here are the Christopher Nolan rankings in its finality. Number 12, The Dark Knight Rises. Number 11, Following. Number 10, Insomnia. Number 9, Batman Begins. Number 8, The Prestige. Number 7, Oppenheimer. Number 6, Memento. Number 5, Interstellar. Number 4, Inception. Number 3, Tenet. Number 2, The Dark Knight. And number 1, Dunkirk. Let me know your thoughts below. If you're on Spotify, you'll see a section where you can kind of let me know what your favorite Christopher Nolan movie is. Let me know what I got wrong, what I got right, what you wanted to hear more about, what you heard too much about. I would love to just like hear your thoughts. It makes me happy to know people are listening and people are interacting. Look forward to an Oppenheimer episode sometime this year. I'm not exactly sure when I'll be doing it, but we'll be talking about Oppenheimer a lot, especially when it comes to award season. And yeah, thank you for listening to this episode. Christopher Nolan is awesome. He's one of the GOATs. I hope you think so too. And maybe you can check out some of the movies that you didn't know about on this list. But that's it for now. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week on Video Village. Take care. Special thanks to my lovely girlfriend Kubra Patel for the podcast's artwork, and my good friend Kevin Cow for the music that you're listening to now. You can find more of his music on Instagram at Wagwong Beats. Thanks, y'all.